I guess that the world has moved on.
In the very early days, I was doing half-day workshops on this eye movement work that I did not yet have a name for. One of the characteristics of these training events was that people kept getting upset. Now, I was doing lots of demonstrations, and often the material that people were going into with the eye movement work, they would get quite distressed, quite upset, have a bit of a breakdown. Now, back in those days, I think I was probably a lot nicer than I am today when it comes to doing therapy work. So these people would be upset. I would be in front of the room with the demo subject, and I would then try and work with the upset that has happened and try and make things nice. One of the things I realized was don't do demonstrations in the last hour of the workshop, because otherwise you end up in the situation, and I know some of you will have been there, like it happened in London. So 10 minutes before the end of the session, I thought, let's do a quick demo. Complete meltdown of the client. I'm there for the next hour and a half trying to do something about this. And of course, people are looking at their watches, they've got trains to catch, and people are going, oh yeah, thanks Andy, yep, see Andy, and sneaking out the room. And I was the last person left with the client at the front of the room into the evening to try and fix the problem. This wasn't the best way to be doing your workshop events. So I recognized that as a pattern that I didn't experience in any other training stuff that I was doing. This seemed to be very specific to eye movements. So I recognized that the eye movement work can stir up a lot of negative emotions for people, that hopefully once they've expressed it and released it, it feels better. That wasn't always the case though in the early days, and me trying then to deal with the upset didn't seem to be very effective. So I thought, okay, let's do something else. So then I made the decision that when people freak out and get upset, I'd ignore it. Let's just see what happens if I do nothing at all. Now, my reasoning for this was quite simple. I'm not a parent. However, I know enough about childcare, and I can remember from my own experiences as a child. Sometimes when you give a small child attention when they're distressed, the child will continue with the distress. Now, I saw this a lot at the hospital as well. Milton Erickson wrote something. Bit of a divergence here. He wrote that when he was a child in hospital, his parents didn't come to visit him. And he actually found that to be quite advantageous because it's easier for him to adapt into being the child at hospital than to be his parents' son in hospital. And so he made the adaptation was a lot easier. Now that matches my observation of children in hospitals too. That sometimes the child is absolutely fine. They have forgotten they're their parent's child. They fitted into the way of being identity role as a hospital patient. Parents would come in and then all the tears would start because they're anchored back into the traditional, typical ways for them to be at home. So the conflict of roles there could be problematic. Now, I remember from experiences as a child where my certain distresses were sometimes just completely ignored. And of course, I'd wake up to the fact that, hang on, this isn't working, and I'd get on with my life. And there's other times when certain distresses do need intervention and attention. How do we know the difference between the two? I think parents will intuitively know a lot of the time with their child. Doesn't mean they always get it right, of course. So my thinking was this. A lot of these emotional states that I'm seeing happening in the IMT, or whatever it was called back then, in these training events, a lot of this might actually be because of me, not because of them. And that my focusing attention upon the state that they've got is the very thing that is maintaining and stabilizing the negative state. And that possibly, if I did nothing at all, it would go away on its own. I mean, let's be realistic. A person comes along to an event where they're going to think about things and move their eyes, and they get upset about that. Are they going to spend the rest of their life crying? Probably not. Very quickly, they'll go about their lives and get on with their lives. However, the more attention I gave it, the longer the state seemed to last. So the first thing I changed was just stop interacting with those negative states. Just ignore them. And the big challenge came in one of the workshops in the south of England where a lady had a convulsion. Again, she was a demo subject. I did the eye movements and she suddenly went all a bit quiet. And then she went a bit kind of strange. And then she went onto the floor and had a pseudo seizure. Now, luckily, I have a background in brain surgery, so I'm very, very familiar with fits of different types. And I'm more than happy to be able to deal with those to a certain level. I could see that this didn't really look like a full naturally occurring epileptic seizure. This was what is known as a pseudo seizure. So I completely ignored her, well, outwardly ignored her, and carried on with the explanation of what I'd just done in the demonstration as she's on the floor, huffing and puffing and doing all sorts of strange things. The group that was watching this really didn't know quite what to do. They were like, what happens now? The lady then picked herself up off the floor and went and sat back down again. And I didn't draw attention to it. Later on, she wrote to me via email to say that she has noticed some of the biggest changes in her life that she's has ever had in all the personal development stuff that she's been doing, and basically was just offering a thank you. Now that caught my attention. As the IMT work developed into longer sessions, so it went from 2 hours to 4 hours to a whole day, and then to 2 days, there was another characteristic that I started to see emerge. And that was of people doing group exercises and then particular individuals running out the room, having to go outside, and they didn't want to be around people because they're so distressed. They would be hyperventilating. They'd have to go out and have a cigarette. They or just disappear for an hour or two. Now, when that first started to happen, I thought, that's weird. I don't see this happen anywhere else. And it concerned me, but I thought, let's just leave it and let's see what happens next. All those people came back, and all those people became the biggest sort of devotees of the work because they recognized afterwards some of the biggest changes had happened for them. So this now starts to get my attention because I can see certain patterns emerging. What I never had was people run out the room and not come back. And I never had people run out the room, not come back, and then complain. I never had people run out the room, come back, and then complain. Basically, there weren't any complaints. I was only getting positive feedback. So now I thought, okay, so the two things here is ignoring it completely seems to be a good thing. And carrying on as if nothing has happened also seems to be a pretty good thing in this context. So now I got something I can start to study and pay attention to. Now, the people running out the room, I wanted to stop that from happening because it didn't seem to me necessarily a good thing for people to be experiencing that and also being in a room where, hey, follow my finger, I'm just doing a group exercise here. And then that person now is worried because the partner they were working with has fled. And that can be quite worrying to individuals. So I wanted to try and eliminate that if possible. So I started to pay attention. Now I started to look at abreaction as a concept, as a therapeutic concept, and also as day-to-day behaviors that people have. Abreaction in therapy generally refers to a therapeutic maneuver. So abreaction therapy is a real thing. We basically get people to relive their upset, express the upset, go through it, and release it. And in theory, that release of emotions comes with accompanying relief. And the relief is fairly long-term. Many of us have experienced this in our lives where a few tears have just burst out of us. We didn't even know they were there. I've had this happen a couple of times. And it's where did that come from? Oh my God, I feel so much better now. Thank you very much. There's a release element that does come with crying. There's a release element that can come with laughter. Sometimes a rage and anger can be immensely relieving once it's over. The issue is, do we end up doing that same thing every day, every single day, and then finding targets that we can release these emotions upon? Okay, now that's not necessarily a healthy behavior, although it can feel great to do so. Cold callers are probably the best people to practice this on if you need a legitimate target. I started to look at abreactions and what does it heal? Basically, what is an abreaction useful for? I could only find one particular area. When abreaction has been used to memory-based trauma, and typically this was used by the false memory people. So Do you remember being abused? No. Well, it must have happened. You're suppressing it or repressing it. And so there's this whole movement of therapists back in the 80s and 90s, and it's resurging, unfortunately. Whole movement that basically says, if you don't remember being abused, then clearly you're repressing it. You must have been abused. Let's find the traumas and abreact you. And then years later, after ongoing brainwashing by the therapist, I remember. Yeah, right. Not quite how things work, but it was a big movement back in the day. Abreaction therapy there only serves to mess people's lives up even more. Where it does work, and where it has been found to be incredibly useful, is where you have a psychosomatic expression of distress. And this was first noted in soldiers after the First World War, when they had so many people with shell shock and various syndromes that had largely physiological manifestation of their symptoms. A lot of these people have paralysis, they would have Parkinsonian type symptoms, a rigidity, limbs would be locked into position and so forth. Abreacting those people tended to release those symptoms very quickly, literally within minutes. And you'll find some video on YouTube where the archive footage has been released by the Pathé Media Archive. And I'll put a link in on this video or in the section below. And you can see the dramatic transformation from somatically expressed distress to, oh, we're looking a lot better now. Doesn't mean they're cured, they just have released that particular set of symptoms. Abreaction therapy just didn't seem to be particularly useful anywhere else. So then I started to look at how are people themselves in day-to-day social discourse using abreaction? How does it manifest in normal circumstances? Because therapy in theory is just utilizing pre-existing normal behaviors, and we're just creating a context where those normal behaviors are being used as a resource. People use abreactions all the time, and this is what I wanted to really start to pay attention to find out what that looked like. And this is where the 3-stage abreaction process came from. And I was looking at how clients who had chronicity, so these were the anxiety and chronic fatigue clients that the local doctor was sending me. I wanted to see, okay, so what have they all got in common? Well, one of them was they would try and control the session. They didn't necessarily know they were doing it. It wasn't necessarily their intention to do so, although for some of them it clearly was. There was a controlling element over me and over the work I would do with that person and over the context of the session. But it wasn't an overt, you will do as I tell you. It was done through a number of means. What they all had in common was the 3-stage abreaction. So if I did something the client didn't approve of or didn't want me to do, they would suddenly start to feel peculiar. Oh, I've got anxiety happening now. Oh, I've got a headache. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to go out for a cigarette. Suddenly there would be an emotional state, an emotional need that would now take precedence and priority over anything that was happening at that moment in time. This suddenly was the more important thing, the more important feature. If I ignored it, which I started to do as I got better at recognizing it, when I ignored those things and carried on with what I was doing, they would increase the amplitude of the signal. So essentially the headache would become a worse headache. The nausea would become even more nauseous. The emotional state they would have would become amplified. So if they're a little bit angry, they'd get more angry. If they're a little bit anxious, they get more anxious. So more energy is put into that signal. If I continued to ignore it and then carry on with what I was doing regardless, then a certain threshold would be reached where then essentially they trip threshold, and now that emotional state, that thing that's happening for them, is now more powerful than anything else in the immediate environment. So they would convulse, they would be sick, they would suddenly not be able to see because it's no longer a headache, it's now a full-blown migraine. They would start hyperventilating and have to lie on the floor, and on it would go. So now by videoing these sessions and then replaying it back, I could find out when those signals were beginning to appear and start to calibrate what were my responses to it and what else could I have done instead. This was the beginning of the 3-stage. So let me just go through this for you. So I'll put it up on the screen. Stage 1 is the signal. Now this is a signal that says, I have a level of emotion, or I have an emotion, I have an experience that is unpleasant to me, and you have to change. Essentially, this is a warning that is being emitted from the system of the person towards you in the environment. Stage 2 is an increase of amplitude of the signal, so more energy gets put into the signal. And this basically now may take a meta position as well. I've already told you I have a headache. I'm warning you. Look, I'm not going to say this again. You get some kind of increase of signal. This might be verbal or it might be non-verbal. There might be an intensification of facial expression. There might be a frantic clasping of the hands or other physiological non-verbal communication that communicates directly. There is a distress here that is building. Essentially now what we have reached is the threat. I've already warned you and you're not going to get a second warning. And the duration from stage 1 to stage 2 will vary according to each individual. The level of tolerance the person has will have a factor in this as well. I can think of one particular example in a workshop. This was a weight loss workshop. The guy, within 10 minutes of me opening the workshop and talking, he was sat with his arms folded and he was clenched and he was just glaring. He wasn't looking at me, he was glaring at me. He was sat right in the middle of the group and his whole body language was just emanating contempt. And he managed to keep that going for a good couple of hours before he then raised his hands with a question. It wasn't really a question. It was one of those, so are you saying, quite aggressively stated, and then he then said, are you saying, and then said something that I have not said, implied, or even ever thought myself. And then insisted that clearly what I had been saying all morning. It clearly wasn't, but to him it was. The game is on. We're at stage 2. He's now in that kind of point of, I'm now threatening you because I have a different opinion and I'm now willing to communicate it to you. So play my game, de-escalate this, or I will up the ante to stage 3. And stage 3, of course, is the full-blown abreaction. This is when now you haven't changed your behavior, so now I'm going to punish you. And I will punish you by totally dominating and hijacking this particular situation and context. Abreactions that I've seen, classic form. I had a small child. He was about 10 years old. He was a right little shit. Now he was brought to me by his mother with behavioural issues. He was pretty obnoxious little brat, and he initially started huffing and puffing in that classic bratish kind of way. Stage 2 was he stood up and kicked the chair over, and then stage 3 was he went out the front door. I was working from home at the time, went to next door who was having some brickwork done on their wall, picked up some bricks and then threw them through my windows. That was stage 3. What is notable here is the whole time that was happening, the mother just sat there passively and did nothing. And then when the bricks came through the window, she continued to sit there and just cried. Then when I went out the front and pinned him down to the floor by the scruff of his neck, that's when she came out and started screaming at me. So essentially, the stage 3 had been taken away from the child by my actions and then was taken over quite brilliantly by the mother. It would be reasonable to say I never saw them again. I would have worked with them again, but they didn't come back. Of course not, because they've reached stage 3. I'm now into the contemptible phase of being punished by them. Other things that I've seen happen in psychiatric units. So signal 1 is, I don't want to do the washing up today. I don't want to do the washing up today. And it's that person's turn to do the washing up. They do it like once a month. Like, oh my God, what a horrendous chore for this individual. Now, this individual is in the position of, because they don't feel well, because they have conditions, they don't have to do the washing up. And some people literally live in this reality. Well, I don't feel like it. Oh, well, whoopee. And yet, analyze your own lives. Analyze how frequently for yourself, I don't feel like it is a perfectly valid reason to not do the thing that would improve your life. It happens all the time. And it amazes me people's willingness to give in to that so readily. My best analogy here is imagine a bunch of accident and emergency staff. trying to get into their peak state prior to the emergency coming in that they've been warned is coming in. And then the doors burst open, they rush in, the person battered and bleeding, but they're not in their peak state. They don't feel like it today. Wouldn't accept it. And yet for some reason people will accept this in their day-to-day lives and spend another day procrastinating and another day doing absolutely nothing, and they'll continue to dream of the greatness that they are capable of. So this person now is saying, I don't feel like it because I don't feel well, I can't do the washing up. And then the person is reminded of the rules that says that it's their turn, they're only asked to do it once a month, and they always behave like this whenever it's their turn to do the washing up. So they really ought to just go and do the washing up. Person says, I've told you I don't feel well. And now they're shouting and making a thing of it. The person actually then said words to the effect of, if you make me, I'll have a psychotic episode. And I have, in psychiatry, I have heard variations on that so frequently, it's extraordinary. I will be ill again, I'll be psychotic, I'll have hallucinations. You can't make me because I will. Absolutely extraordinary. I saw it in a school as well, where the child said, I've not had my Ritalin this morning, so it won't be my fault if I do X, Y, and Z. And this was directly to a teacher who this child was threatening. Quite amazing behaviours that somehow and for some reason our society tolerates and doesn't clamp down on with full force, which might be a good thing, might not be. And then stage 3 was reached when the person then completely flips out, starts throwing things around in the kitchen, having an absolute tantrum. She's in her 50s, this lady. Absolute tantrum because of doing the washing up, and things got smashed and everything else. And then we have to call in additional staff, and they're taken away and restrained and medicated. And the same thing will be repeated next month. Because for some reason it's much easier to be psychotic and be forcibly sedated and locked in your room for the rest of the afternoon so you can calm down than it is simply to do the washing up, which will take 10 minutes. And yet, again, analyze your own behaviors, analyze your own thought processes. How often do you actually do variations of this yourself? Because by analyzing your own behaviors and the way that you do these things yourself, it will give you insight into how other people don't. How other people don't do stuff as well, and how other people do have reactions. It's an extraordinary thing. I've put so many videos on the IEMT website asking people to do the most simple stuff to improve their business. The simple stuff about the profiles, the simple stuff around the videos, and putting stuff on the Reddit forum, putting stuff on the Facebook pages. And you know what? How many people do it? Hardly anybody. I know you've watched the videos. Well, some of you have. Most of you haven't even bothered. But there'll be reasons, and the reasons will be you don't feel like it. You haven't got the motivation in place today to get the thing done. This is the basis of the 3-stage abreaction. It is the substitution of state for something else that actually forms a permission. So when I freak out and I say, I don't feel like it, you can't make me, in my world, that kinesthetic system is equal to not having to do the very thing, because the kinesthetic system is more important than the thing to be done. And so in my reality, that works. Now, it's only constructed in my individual reality. It doesn't exist out there in the world. And this is how people tend to think. Animals do the same. If you've got a cat, you'll recognize they do it. Dogs are pretty good at it too. I suspect most animals have a 3-stage abreaction to a point in different contexts. Now, what I did with the IMT work is I did not differentiate between an abreaction that is a release of emotion that brings about relief and an escalating emotional state that actually is designed to control and manipulate. I didn't draw any distinction between those two. I grouped the two things to be the same thing, and we treat them in exactly the same way. And that is with the that's right method. Now, the that's right thing is very easy to get wrong. I don't recommend people do this online in Facebook conversations and so forth. It's not something that necessarily comes across very well without tonality and without context. And one of the things I say to people is just be aware that if you're using these techniques publicly on public forums, just consider how this looks to other people who don't know this particular work. It might not make you look particularly good as an individual. So it's just something to be aware of. The reality is it probably doesn't actually matter that much, but it is something just to be aware of. I tend not to do this in written format. I tend not to do it in the way that I teach it. I teach it to give people a technique, but it's much better done conversationally. So the person says, I'm not happy with the way that you're looking at me. We can say, that's right. We haven't dismissed what they've said. We haven't blocked what they've said. What we've done is we've acknowledged it. Now, we need to go a little bit further than that, because I don't like the way you're looking at me, that's right, doesn't give the next step function. It doesn't go anywhere. It just hangs there. That can be useful, and I can think of 1,000 examples from my own life where I've used this clinically, and it has been a very useful thing to do. But it might not necessarily be the best thing. I can say, that's right, you don't like the way I'm looking at you. So I've acknowledged it and pasted it. And that can be quite a good little thing to do, because now we just wait to see what happens. And what does happen is one of two things. The person recognizes the pattern, they apologize, they have a little insight, and they don't do it again. Or, more commonly, they increase the feeling, they go to stage 2. That now gives us the opportunity, having fed it back to the person, and we have now handed them back their feeling, whilst demonstrating we're not going to be changed by how they feel. Now what we can do is say, and you don't appear to be very comfortable, or you appear to be a little bit angry, or whatever the thing is that we detect. If we get an acknowledgement of that, which invariably you will, you can say, and how strong is this feeling out of 10? Or it goes like this: I don't like the way you're looking at me. I go, that's right, you don't like the way I'm looking at you. How is this feeling for you right now? On a score out of 10, how strong is this feeling? You see what we can do there. And we go straight into the basic pattern. So what we're doing, we're using our tonality to maintain a momentum. There's always a next step function. What comes next? And you must be in charge of what comes next. Because if all we have is, I don't like the way that you are, that's right. You've just left it up to the other person now to decide what to do next. You've not only acknowledged that they are right, you've handed them the power and the control. So we must connect it to the next step function. So that's right, you don't like it. On a score out of 10, how strong is this? With 10 being as strong as it can be. And how familiar is this feeling? So we're using the that's right pattern as a way of handling 3-stage ab reactions, but also using it in a way that is beneficial for the client. We're not doing this to score points over the person. You might want to do this with people you don't like. They soon leave you alone. They soon realize, hang on, I'm not getting anywhere with this person. It can work at parties if you want to get rid of a person. I don't recommend you to do this, say, on social media or in text. Do this with clients when you're seeing a pattern that you want to help the person with, rather than point scoring and counter control. Don't get into the game of control and counter control. So I'm not very happy with this process. I thought you were going to do this NLP thing. That's right, you did think I was going to do NLP. Then I'm going to wait, because I want to see what they do next. So I'm not giving them a next step function. I want to find out what their next step function is. Well, I'm not very happy with this. And I go, that's right, you're not very happy. Now, this lack of happiness, how strong is this out of 10? So I'm always looking for where I can utilize this to get the person's state to the basic pattern. At the point they're saying, I'm not happy with this, they're saying my emotions are because of the session, not because of my expectation set and lack of doing homework to find out who you are as a therapist. They're not basically taking responsibility for their experience during their time on this planet. They're basically having an emotional reaction and blaming you. So what we're doing is we're disconnecting some of those things to make the person more empowered. We're not using that's right punitively and as a method to disempower the person. That's quite an important distinction. The other thing is, with discussion on ab reactions, it always makes it sound like everyone's ab reacting all the time in my therapy sessions and everyone's crazy and there's all... This doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, you can simply use that's right within an everyday context conversation with the client to open up stuff that you can get them then into the basic pattern. It's not necessarily they're all crazy and they're all going to flip out and smash your windows. I use the extreme examples because they're the most notable ones. The reason I give them is because I want people to be aware that if you can handle the more extreme end of people's 3-stage ab reactions, then dealing with the ordinary everyday ones is so much easier, and it makes you a much more effective therapist. Really, really pay attention to your own patterns, and that way you will start to be able to notice them in other people. How do you deal with an ab reaction once they hit stage 3 and they completely flip out? Most of the time, don't be there, be somewhere else. So if the person flips out and completely has a meltdown, just like you would with a small child having a tantrum, let them get on with it. If that involves them smashing things up and being a physical threat to you, I think I've probably had that no more than in my whole professional career. Half a dozen times I can think of those sort of things. Not in IMT sessions, these were in other contexts. The best thing you do is run. I want to just give an easy example for me, because it was, for me, the most dramatic. I was working in the medical centre doing a night shift at the factory. One of the guys burst through the front doors. He was a big fella, never seen him before. And he stands to attention and salutes, and he's putting on this kind of sergeant major voice, and I've no idea what he's talking about or what he's doing. And my initial reaction was, the boys are bored, the factory workers, they've come to play a joke on the guy in medical. That was my initial thought. I quickly realised this is not a prank, this guy's nuts. And he's a big fella, and he looks a little bit mean and menacing. Now, he's in a soldier role, right? What do soldiers do? They tend to kill people. Now, he starts moving towards me, and I start backing away, and two things I realise: he's a big fella and I'm not a very good fighter, and I'm moving away from the door further into the medical unit, and he stands between me and the door, and I'm trying to calm him down. I'm trying to say all the right things, not having much luck. And then I realised, what am I doing? What am I even trying to get control of this for? And I ducked down to underneath his flailing arms and just run. I just sprinted out that door over to the security office. I don't know what would happen if I hadn't done that. I suspect he would have done me harm. That certainly was his reputation, as I discovered later. The mistake that people make is when they're in a one-up position as a professional with a person in a one-down position who's not a professional, and things go bad, they try and contain the situation. Don't bother. If there's a risk, a threat to you in that context, get out of there. Be somewhere else. Fast. Don't stand around waiting to see if they're going to hurt you. Just move. Did this on the train. Nutter on the train? Most people just sit there pretending there's no nutter on the train. Go and change carriages. Get off at the next stop. Change your position. Go somewhere else. But people don't. They shut down and pretend to ignore these things, whilst not ignoring these things at the same time. If it's like a childlike tantrum, they're having a little, a funny 5 minutes to give you a display, don't be there to watch it. Go and put the kettle on. Leave them for half an hour. Or lead them out the door, shove them out the door, see you tomorrow. Just simply don't engage with stage 3. It's very, very hard to do, but if you think of it as a parent with a small child who's tantruming, okay, this gives you a context by which to operate. The one where the lady, my demonstration subject, had a pseudo-seizure on the floor, that was actually relatively easy to deal with, simply because I'm so familiar with seizures. The bit that's unfamiliar to deal with is how I'm now appearing to people who are watching this whole thing, who now, see, here's the thing. Presenter at front of room, person on floor convulsing, presenter ignores convulsing person. If I was in the audience, I don't think I would just be sat there passively waiting to see what happened next. I'd intervene. I'm that intervening kind of guy. That's also what I'm aware of, is if I don't do something, how are other parties involved in this now going to behave to add to the potential drama of the situation? So you've got to take things on its merits. Like the small child smashing up my windows, the mother now intervenes, going from passive and inert to being active and hijacking the stage 3 as she starts yelling and shouting at me. So there are other considerations you have, of course. In a psychiatric environment or a professional environment where you're paid by other people, to simply ignore something might be judged by your colleagues, it might be judged by your managers. So in those situations, realistically, you look after yourself. You do what you need to do, because don't sacrifice your profession, your job, on behalf of some idiot who's doing a stage 3. That's possibly the best advice I can give. For 99% of people, that's never going to arise as an issue. So it's possibly not worth worrying about, but it's worth playing through the scenarios in your head. What would you do in these situations? That way you can prepare for the work that you're going to do. Here's things I'm going to urge you to begin to do. Get transcriptions of the sessions that you do. Video the sessions, record them. Analyze them. Do a script analysis, do a session analysis, find out what's actually going on. What did you miss during those sessions? What things were said that where a multitude of information comes at once, you could only respond to one of those things, and that then took the direction of the session. What were the other things you didn't respond to because you couldn't, which then get lost in the interaction? And it's worth doing session analysis. Most people don't do this. They simply run their sessions and they just hope for the best. And then they don't hear from the clients again. Get follow-up, get feedback. Really get into the nuts and bolts and the tiny, tiny details of the interactions that you're doing. Video yourself. Become aware of your own facial expressions, your mannerisms, how you come across to other people. If it's making you cringe to do that, good. It means you can do something about it. Merely attending the course, getting the certification, and then running sessions isn't enough. I want people to do more. I want people to get much better at what they're doing. We're building this to be a professional thing, so join us and you know what to do. I'm leaving the comment section on this page open. If you have any examples of ab reactions, any videos you find on YouTube or anywhere else, if you have any stories of ab reactions and how you've dealt with it, some funnies and some horrors, those kind of things, stick them in the comment section below. These are the rare events. So it's worth having a good collection of people's experiences so we get a good idea of what these things look like. Comment section below, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.
I guess that the world has moved on, and uncertainties are now gone. Some for the best and some for the worse. There's a new kind of wisdom being dispersed. I guess time never stands still, and I know that and it never will. But I miss the old ways and I miss the old days as we're looking back over the hill, looking back over a lifetime, looking back over again. It wasn't so bad, those times that we had together as two way back when. Looking back over the memories, looking back still brings a thrill. As long as you're near, I don't mind that we're just looking back over the hill. Do whatever they feel they need to. Build something to last, not repeat the past. Once that was like me and you.